It all started with whispers, subtle, elusive things I couldn't quite place but felt in my bones. My wife, Emily, had been the center of my world for the past decade. We had built a life together, filled with laughter, shared dreams, and the warmth of a bond one believed was unshakable. She worked in real estate, a job that demanded long hours and unpredictable schedules. At first, I admired her drive. She'd return from work glowing with tales of closed deals and satisfied clients. But somewhere along the line, that glow dimmed. The stories became sparse, replaced by vague mentions of meetings and business dinners. It wasn't obvious at first. Emily was careful, subtle changes in her routine, a distracted smile when we talked, her phone always facing down on the table. I convinced myself it was nothing. People change, right? Work gets stressful. But the gnawing feeling that something was wrong wouldn't let me rest. Then, one day, the cracks began to show. I came home early from a business trip to surprise her. The house was quiet, eerily so. Emily was in the shower, and her phone sat unlocked on the counter. I hesitated, feeling like an intruder, but curiosity got the better of me. What I found shook me to my core. A string of messages from a number saved as Liam painted a picture I couldn't ignore. Words like "miss you" and "can't wait to see you again" flashed before my eyes. I scrolled further, finding photos, intimate ones she had never sent me. My world crumbled in that moment, but the worst was yet to come. When I confronted her that evening, she denied everything at first, her voice steady, her eyes cold. But then, as I pressed, her facade cracked. She admitted to an affair, but not just with anyone. Her lover was my half-brother, Aaron. The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. Not only had the woman I loved lied to me, but she had also chosen to do so with someone I shared blood with. It was a double-edged sword, each side sharper than the last. I didn't know what to do then. All I knew was that my life as I knew it was over. And in that moment, as the weight of her betrayal pressed down on me, a seed of vengeance began to take root in my heart. I spent that night pacing the house, my mind racing with every possible emotion: anger, sadness, disbelief. Emily had gone to bed after our confrontation, leaving me alone with the silence of the night and the echoes of her confession. My half-brother, Aaron, of all people. Growing up, Aaron had always been the golden child. We shared the same father, but our lives couldn't have been more different. While I worked to earn everything I had, Aaron breezed through life on charm and privilege. He was the life of every party, the guy everyone wanted to be around. But for him to be the one Emily turned to, that betrayal felt like a dagger twisted into an old wound. The next morning, I tried to act normal, for the kids, if nothing else. Emily seemed tense but composed, sipping her coffee like the confession of her affair hadn't shattered everything we had built. Her phone buzzed on the counter, and I couldn't help but glance at it. The name Liam flashed across the screen. She noticed my gaze and grabbed the phone quickly, muttering something about work. I didn't respond. I couldn't. The anger bubbling beneath the surface was threatening to explode, but I knew I needed to play the long game. I decided to dig deeper. If Emily and Aaron had been hiding this from me, who else knew? Was I the only fool in our circle of family and friends? I started with small things, checking her social media for hidden clues, scrolling through old photos for patterns I might have missed. I even searched for receipts and credit card statements, trying to piece together the puzzle of their deception. What I found made my stomach churn. Charges for hotel stays on weekends. I thought she was visiting her parents. Expensive dinners for two at places we'd never gone together. Texts with cryptic mentions of seeing you soon and missing your touch. But it wasn't just the affair. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how long I had been in the dark. My half-brother had been using me, too. Aaron and I had recently partnered on a business venture, a small investment I made in good faith, trusting him to handle the details. I discovered that he had been funneling money from the project into his personal accounts, leaving me with losses I hadn't even noticed yet. The realization hit me like a tidal wave. This wasn't just betrayal. It was a calculated, cold manipulation of my trust by both of them. But I wasn't going to let them destroy me. Not without a fight. I started formulating a plan. If they thought they could get away with this, They were sorely mistaken. I wasn't going to confront Aaron yet, not until I had every piece of evidence I needed. Emily had already proven she was a skilled liar, and Aaron was no different. They were playing a game, but I was about to change the rules. That night, as Emily slept soundly beside me, I stayed awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind whirring with possibilities. Revenge wasn't just a thought. It was becoming a promise. The days that followed were a whirlwind of quiet observation and careful planning. I didn't confront Emily or Aaron. Not yet. Instead, I chose to observe, letting them believe I was oblivious. If they thought they'd won, they'd drop their guard, and that's when I'd strike. Emily continued her daily routines, her mask of normalcy intact. She kissed me goodbye in the mornings, texted me during the day, and played the role of the perfect wife at home. But her eyes betrayed her guilt. Every now and then, I'd catch her staring at me, her face clouded with unease. She knew something had changed between us, but couldn't pinpoint what. Aaron, on the other hand, was his usual cocky self. We met for coffee one afternoon to discuss our business venture. He sat across from me, grinning, sipping his latte like nothing had happened. I watched him closely, looking for cracks in his armor, but there were none. He was a master manipulator, skilled at hiding the truth beneath layers of charm and confidence. "Business is going great," he said, sliding some documents across the table. "We'll see big returns soon. Trust me." The irony of his words wasn't lost on me. Trust him? Not a chance. I signed the papers he presented without hesitation, masking my contempt with a polite smile. Inside, I was burning with rage. How could someone I had grown up with, someone I had called my brother, betray me like this? That night, after Emily fell asleep, I began digging into Aaron's life. It wasn't hard to find dirt. He had a reputation for bad decisions and reckless behavior. What shocked me, though, was the extent of his deceit. The investment scam wasn't the only thing he'd been up to. He had racked up debts gambling, and there were rumors of other affairs. His trail of destruction wasn't limited to my life. I compiled everything: screenshots, bank statements, photos. Every piece of evidence I uncovered became part of a growing dossier. I wasn't just collecting proof of their betrayal. I was building a weapon. I knew I couldn't confront them without leverage, and this was it. But the final piece came unexpectedly. Late one night, as I was scrolling through Emily's messages, I found an email thread that made my blood run cold. It was from Aaron. In it, he detailed plans to convince Emily to leave me. He talked about selling her on a dream of a life with him, far away from me, far away from the mess they had created. "I know he's catching on," Aaron had written, "but don't worry. I'll handle him. Once we're out of here, he won't be a problem anymore." Handle me. Those words echoed in my mind. I wasn't just dealing with betrayal. I was dealing with people who thought they could erase me from my own life. They were wrong. Dead wrong. The more I uncovered, the more the weight of their betrayal pressed down on me. But with that weight came clarity. I wasn't going to let them win. If they thought I was weak, if they thought I'd crumble under the pressure, they had severely underestimated me. Emily's behavior became more erratic in the days following my discovery of Aaron's email. She was careful but not careful enough. Her late-night work meetings became more frequent, and her explanations thinner. I let her go without protest, even encouraging her at times. Every step she took toward Aaron was another step into the trap I was quietly setting. I installed a GPS tracker on her car, a simple device hidden beneath the bumper. Each time she left the house, I tracked her movements on my phone. As expected, her destinations told a damning story. A boutique hotel downtown, Aaron's apartment, even a cabin rental in the mountains, places she thought I'd never know about. My patience was tested when I followed her one evening. She had told me she'd be working late, but the tracker showed her heading to a small bar just outside the city. I parked a safe distance away and slipped inside, keeping to the shadows. There she was, sitting in a corner booth with Aaron, their heads close together, hands touching across the table. My stomach churned as I watched them laugh, oblivious to my presence. It took everything in me to stay calm. Walking over, flipping the table, and confronting them right then and there would have been satisfying, but it wasn't part of the plan. Instead, I snapped a few photos from my concealed position and slipped back out unnoticed. The anger boiling in my chest was almost too much to bear, but I had to stay focused. This wasn't about impulsive revenge. It was about dismantling their lives piece by piece. Meanwhile, I began subtly untangling myself from the financial web Aaron had roped me into. I had the documents I'd signed, yes, but I also had a lawyer, an old friend who specialized in corporate fraud. We worked quietly, preparing the groundwork to not only recover my investment, but to leave Aaron facing legal repercussions he couldn't escape. At home, I continued the act. Emily was growing more distant, but she still played her role when it mattered. Family dinners, social events. I played mine too, the devoted husband who was none the wiser. Every smile I gave her was a lie, every kiss a mask. I hated what I was becoming, but I knew it was necessary. The tipping point came one evening when Aaron called me out of the blue. "Hey, brother," he said, his tone casual. "I've been meaning to talk to you about the investment. Got some exciting updates." I gritted my teeth, forcing a friendly tone. "Sure thing. Let's meet up." We arranged to meet at his place the next day. I wasn't sure what his angle was, but I knew it was time to confront him, not with anger, but with strategy. I needed to see how far he was willing to go, how deep his lies ran. I arrived at his apartment early, unannounced, hoping to catch him off guard. What I found wasn't surprising, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. Emily was there, her hair tousled, wearing one of his shirts. She froze when she saw me in the doorway, her face a mix of shock and panic. Aaron stepped out of the bedroom, his smug grin vanishing the moment he saw me. "Well," I said, my voice calm but ice-cold, "I guess the investment update can wait." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with tension, the weight of their betrayal hanging between us. Finally, Aaron laughed nervously, trying to play it off. "Look, man, this isn't what it seems." "Save it," I snapped, cutting him off. "I know exactly what this is. And believe me, you're going to regret every single second of it." I turned and walked out, leaving them to their stunned silence. My heart was pounding, but I felt a grim sense of satisfaction. The first threads of their carefully constructed facade were beginning to unravel, and it was only the beginning. The confrontation at Aaron's apartment was a line crossed, a moment I couldn't walk back from. The look on their faces as I left, the guilt, the panic, was burned into my memory. But it wasn't enough. I needed more than their shame. I needed them to feel the weight of what they had done. Emily tried to act normal when she came home that night, but I could see the cracks in her mask. She avoided eye contact, her movements stiff and uncertain. It was almost laughable, the way she pretended nothing had changed. "Long day?" I asked as she slipped off her shoes in the hallway. She hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "Yeah, just work stuff. You know how it is." "Of course," I replied with a tight smile. "Glad you're home." Her relief was palpable. She thought I'd let it go, that I wasn't going to pursue what I'd seen. It was exactly what I wanted her to think. Meanwhile, I took the next step in my plan. I called my lawyer, Jacob, and laid everything out. The affair, the financial betrayal, the lies. Jacob had been a friend for years, and his no-nonsense demeanor was exactly what I needed. "First things first," Jacob said. "You need to protect your assets. If she thinks you're onto her, she could try to siphon off funds or make a move on the house." We worked late into the night, drafting documents, freezing joint accounts, and setting up contingencies. By the time we were done, the safety net I'd built was ironclad. Emily wouldn't see a penny of what she hadn't earned, and Aaron's fraudulent schemes would crumble under legal scrutiny. But I wasn't just planning for the practical fallout. I wanted to make them feel the emotional weight of their betrayal, the kind of pain that lingers, that doesn't let go. I started small. The next morning, I left a single photograph on Emily's vanity. It was one I'd taken at the bar, the two of them leaning close, their hands touching. No note, no explanation, just the image. When I returned home that evening, Emily was pale, her eyes darting nervously whenever I spoke. She didn't mention the photo, but I saw her glance at me more than once, as if trying to gauge what I knew. It was working. She was unraveling. Aaron, on the other hand, was proving harder to rattle. I arranged another meeting under the guise of discussing our business. He showed up late, his usual cocky grin firmly in place. "You've been quiet," he said, leaning back in his chair. "Everything good?" "Couldn't be better," I replied, sliding a folder across the table. He opened it, his face falling as he skimmed the contents. Bank statements, fraudulent transfers, and proof of his misdeeds stared back at him. This isn't what it looks like," he stammered, his confidence crumbling. "It's exactly what it looks like," I said, my voice steady. "You've been skimming money, lying to me, and, oh, let's not forget, sleeping with my wife." Aaron's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. He tried to protest, but I cut him off. "You've been playing games, Aaron, but you picked the wrong person to screw over." I stood and walked out, leaving him with the evidence of his own downfall. As I stepped into the cool evening air, a weight lifted from my chest. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had the upper hand. But this was far from over. The game was only just beginning. Aaron didn't call or text after our meeting. He knew the evidence I had on him wasn't just a threat. It was a ticking time bomb. Emily, however, wasn't as composed. Over the next few days, she became increasingly erratic. Her smiles were forced, her conversations clipped. It was clear she was unraveling, and I made sure to nudge her closer to the edge. One morning, as she left for work, I handed her a manila envelope. "What's this?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "Just some papers I thought you'd want to see," I replied casually. "Have a good day, Emily." She hesitated, but eventually left without opening it. I could almost feel the weight of her anxiety as she drove away. Inside the envelope was a carefully curated selection of what I'd uncovered: hotel receipts, text messages, and a printout of Aaron's email about their plans to handle me. It was just enough to make her panic, to remind her that I was in control. That evening, she was waiting for me when I got home, her face pale and drawn. "We need to talk," she said, clutching the envelope like it might burst into flames. "Do we?" I asked, feigning indifference as I set down my bag. "Look, I made a mistake," she stammered. "I don't know what I was thinking, but it's over. I swear it's over." Her desperation was almost pitiful, but I didn't flinch. "You think this is just about you and Aaron?" I asked, my voice low. "This is about everything, Emily. The lies, the betrayal, the way you've turned our lives into a joke." "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "I'll do anything to fix this." "Anything?" I repeated, leaning in close. "We'll see." That night, as she cried herself to sleep, I made my next move. Aaron had been silent, but I wasn't about to let him fade into the background. Using the evidence I had gathered, I sent an anonymous tip to his employer about his fraudulent activities. Within days, he was suspended pending an investigation. The fallout was swift and brutal, and I relished every moment of it. But I wasn't done yet. I began dismantling Emily's social life piece by piece. Mutual friends who had known about the affair were subtly exposed through carefully placed comments and revelations. Invitations dried up, and whispers followed her wherever she went. She became a pariah, her carefully constructed image crumbling before her eyes. The final straw came when I filed for divorce. I handed her the papers one evening, watching as her hands shook while she read them. "You can't do this," she said, her voice barely audible. "We can work through this." "No, Emily," I replied coldly. "You worked through us the moment you chose Aaron over me." Her tears didn't move me. The years of love and trust we had shared felt like ashes now, scattered and meaningless. She was left to deal with the fallout, and I felt no guilt about it. Aaron, meanwhile, was sinking fast. His financial troubles became public knowledge, and his reputation was in ruins. Without my investment to prop him up, his ventures collapsed, leaving him scrambling to salvage what little he had left. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he was planning to leave town, tail tucked firmly between his legs. As for me, I felt a strange sense of calm. My life was far from perfect, but I was free. Free from their lies, their schemes, and the shadow of betrayal that had haunted me. But there was still one final act to this story, one last move that would leave no doubt about who had truly won. Aaron was desperate, and desperation had a way of making people reckless. Rumors reached me that he had been trying to secure loans from mutual friends, spinning tales of bad luck and unfair treatment to garner sympathy. What little support he had left was waning quickly, and I knew it wouldn't be long before he came to me. Sure enough, he called one evening, his voice strained and unfamiliar. "We need to talk," he said. The bravado I was used to completely gone. "Do we?" I replied, feigning indifference. "Because I feel like we've said everything that needs to be said." "Please, man," he pleaded. "Just give me a chance to explain." I agreed to meet him, not because I wanted to hear his excuses, but because I wanted to see him squirm. We met at a small diner on the outskirts of town, a neutral ground where I knew he couldn't cause a scene. Aaron looked worse for wear. His clothes were wrinkled, his hair unkempt, and the confident smirk he always wore was replaced by a look of sheer exhaustion. As he sat across from me, I couldn't help but feel a twinge of satisfaction. This was the man who had once thought he could take everything from me, reduced to a shadow of himself. "I'm sorry," he began, his voice shaky. "I didn't mean for things to get so out of hand." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "Out of hand? You slept with my wife, Aaron. You stole from me. You tried to destroy my life. And now you think a simple apology is going to fix it." He flinched at my words, but I didn't care. I wasn't there to comfort him. "I was stupid," he admitted. I thought I could have everything. The money, the girl, the business. But it all fell apart. "And whose fault is that?" I asked, my tone icy. He didn't respond, his head hanging low. The silence stretched between us, heavy and unrelenting. Finally, he looked up, his eyes pleading. "Please," he said. "I've lost everything. I just need a fresh start." I stared at him for a long moment, my anger bubbling just beneath the surface. "A fresh start?" I repeated. "Do you have any idea what you've done to me? To my life? You don't get to walk away from this clean." He opened his mouth to respond, but I cut him off. "You're on your own, Aaron," I said, standing up. "You made your choices. Now you get to live with them." I left him sitting there, his shoulders slumped and his head in his hands. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. He had been the architect of his own downfall, and I wasn't going to help him rebuild. Back at home, Emily was waiting for me, her face pale and her eyes red from crying. She had tried to salvage some semblance of normalcy in her life, but it was clear that everything was slipping through her fingers. The divorce papers sat untouched on the coffee table, a stark reminder of what was coming. "Did you see him?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "I did," I replied, my tone devoid of emotion. "And he's exactly where he deserves to be." She didn't argue or plead. She simply nodded, as if accepting her fate. For the first time, I saw the weight of her actions fully settle on her shoulders. She wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with anymore. She was a stranger, a shadow of the person I thought I knew. As I went to bed that night, a strange sense of peace washed over me. The storm was finally breaking, and I was ready to move on. But I wasn't finished yet. There was still one final step, one last move that would cement my victory and leave them both with nothing. With Aaron's life in shambles and Emily teetering on the edge, it was time for the final piece of my plan to fall into place. I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, ensuring that every detail was perfect, every angle covered. The goal was simple, to leave no doubt about who was in control. Emily had been avoiding the divorce papers, clinging to the hope that I might change my mind. I gave her no such illusions. Instead, I quietly gathered the last pieces of evidence I needed to seal my case. Emails, photos, financial records. It was all meticulously cataloged, ready to be presented in court. But it wasn't just about the divorce. It was about ensuring that Emily and Aaron couldn't pick up the pieces of their lives and move on as if nothing had happened. I wanted them to feel the weight of their actions long after I was gone. The first step was the house. Legally, it was still in both our names, but I had taken precautions to ensure that Emily couldn't sell it or use it as leverage. With the help of my lawyer, I filed a motion to have her removed from the property. The evidence of her infidelity and financial irresponsibility made it an easy case to argue. The day the order came through, I handed it to her without a word. She read it slowly, her face crumbling with each passing second. "You're kicking me out," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I'm reclaiming what's mine," I replied coldly. "You can stay until the end of the week. After that, you're on your own." She didn't argue. She didn't cry. She simply nodded, as if she had finally resigned herself to the consequences of her choices. The second step was Aaron. His fraudulent activities had left him vulnerable, and I made sure to exploit every weakness. The anonymous tip to his employer had been just the beginning. I reached out to the authorities, providing them with detailed records of his financial misdeeds. Within days, he was facing charges that would ruin whatever reputation he had left. When the news broke, it was all over social media. Aaron's name was plastered across headlines, his face a symbol of greed and deceit. Mutual friends reached out to me, expressing their shock and disgust. I played my part well, acting like the betrayed brother who had no idea what Aaron had been up to. It wasn't hard. Most of it was true. The final step was public exposure. Emily and Aaron had operated in the shadows, hiding their betrayal behind a veneer of normalcy. I decided to strip that away. I anonymously uploaded the evidence of their affair to a private forum frequented by our mutual acquaintances. Photos, messages, hotel receipts. It was all there, laid bare for the world to see. The fallout was immediate. Emily's social circle evaporated overnight. Friends she had known for years stopped returning her calls. Invitations dried up. She became a ghost in the community, whispered about, but never confronted. Aaron fared no better. His disgrace was complete, and the once charismatic man who had charmed his way through life was left with nothing. As for me, I stood amidst the wreckage, finally free of the chains they had tried to bind me with. The divorce was finalized quickly, thanks to the mountain of evidence I had presented. The house was mine, the account secure, and my reputation intact. On the day Emily moved out, she stopped in the doorway, her suitcase in hand. "Do you hate me?" she asked, her voice breaking. I stared at her for a long moment before replying. "I don't hate you, Emily, but I'll never forgive you." She nodded, a single tear rolling down her cheek, and walked out without another word. For the first time in months, the house was quiet. I stood in the empty living room, the weight of the past few weeks lifting from my shoulders. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew one thing. I was finally free. The days after Emily's departure were eerily peaceful. For the first time in what felt like years, I had the house to myself. I spent those quiet hours reflecting, sorting through the remnants of our life together. Wedding photos, anniversary cards, souvenirs from vacations, all of it felt like artifacts from someone else's life. I boxed it all up, leaving no trace of Emily in the home we once shared. The act was cathartic, a way of reclaiming not just the space but my sense of self. By the end of the week, the house felt lighter, as if the weight of her betrayal had finally been lifted. Aaron, on the other hand, wasn't so lucky. His legal troubles were spiraling out of control, and word had spread about the affair. He became a social pariah, ostracized by the very people who had once fawned over him. I heard through mutual acquaintances that he had been forced to sell his apartment and was living out of a cheap motel. It was a fitting end for someone who had built his life on lies. But I wasn't done yet. One evening, as I sorted through some old documents, I stumbled upon a file containing the details of Aaron's biggest lie, the fraudulent investment scheme. I had enough evidence to sink him completely, but I decided to take a different approach. Instead of handing it over to the authorities, I sent copies to every major client he'd ever worked with. The fallout was immediate. Lawsuits began piling up, and Aaron was left scrambling to defend himself. His remaining assets were seized, and any hope of a fresh start was gone. He was finished, both personally and professionally. Meanwhile, Emily reached out, asking to meet. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We met at a small cafe, the kind of place we used to frequent when we were happy. She looked tired, worn down by the consequences of her actions. "I just wanted to apologize," she said, her voice trembling. "For everything. For Aaron. For the lies. For all of it." I didn't respond immediately. I sipped my coffee, letting the silence stretch between us. "Apology accepted," I said finally, though my tone was devoid of warmth. But it doesn't change anything. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. I know. I just needed to say it. We parted ways, and as I walked away, I felt a strange sense of closure. Emily's words didn't erase the pain, but they marked the end of a chapter one was ready to leave behind. With the divorce finalized and Aaron's downfall complete, I began rebuilding my life. I reconnected with old friends, threw myself into my work, and started taking better care of myself. Slowly but surely, the pieces began to fall into place. One afternoon, as I was tidying up the house, I found an old journal tucked away in a drawer. It was filled with plans Emily and I had made for the future, vacations we wanted to take, dreams we hoped to achieve. I read through it, surprised at how bittersweet the memories felt. But instead of dwelling on what could have been, I decided to create a new journal, one filled with my own goals and aspirations. It was time to focus on me. Life became simpler, quieter. I started traveling, visiting places I'd always wanted to see. Along the way, I met new people, forming connections that reminded me of the good in the world. It wasn't easy to trust again, but little by little, I began to open up. One evening, at a small bookstore in a coastal town, I met someone, Sophia. She was warm, kind, and had a way of making me laugh that felt effortless. We started talking, and before I knew it, hours had passed. For the first time in a long while, I felt a spark of hope. Sophia and I began seeing each other regularly. She was patient with me, understanding the scars I carried. With her, I found a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. She reminded me that life could be good again, that love didn't have to be a battlefield. As our relationship grew, so did my confidence. I started taking risks, pursuing dreams I'd long abandoned. I even sold the house Emily and I had shared, moving into a smaller, cozier place that felt like a fresh start. Aaron's legal battles dragged on for months, but the outcome was inevitable. He was convicted of multiple counts of fraud and sentenced to several years in prison. Emily, though not directly involved in his schemes, found herself tainted by association. Her reputation never recovered, and she eventually moved to another state to escape the whispers. Hearing about their fates brought a sense of finality. They had reaped what they'd sown, and I felt no pity for them. My focus was on the life I was building, one free of their shadows. Years passed, and the pain of betrayal became a distant memory. Sophia and I built a life together, one filled with laughter, love, and mutual respect. I often thought about the man I had been before Emily and Aaron's betrayal, and how far I had come since then. The journey hadn't been easy, but it had taught me something invaluable, that even in the face of betrayal and loss, it's possible to rebuild, to find joy, to reclaim your life. And that's exactly what I did.